So my name is Megan Chiro. I'm 17 years old. I'm from New Jersey, and I'm here at the Woodstock Fruit Festival because raw food changed my life. When I was 13, I was diagnosed with an incurable form of brain cancer, and doctors really didn't know what to do for me. They offered me chemo and radiation, but there was no consensus of what I had and what could cure it and what could be done for me. And I ended up finding raw food, and it saved my life. After a year and a half, I went into remission, and now I'm totally cured at 17, and I can just live my life again. And
back with Chris, who was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer at just 26 years old. Ignoring his doctor's recommendations that he undergo an aggressive course of chemotherapy, Chris tried changing his diet instead, and boy, lo and behold, it worked. Okay, Chris, what made you decide to put such faith in nutritional therapy?
Well, you know, I think instinctively I believe that the earth is created for us and that everything we need to thrive comes from the earth. That was an easy thing for me to believe and understand. And so if that's true, then maybe I need to overdose on fruits and vegetables, on plant food. But yeah, after about a week, I felt amazing.
And how did your doctors, did your doctors support this decision, your oncologist?
No.
No?
Nope.
Did they continue to treat you? How are you feeling these days?
Great. I'm in the best shape of my life. I'm the strongest I've been, healthiest. I mean, I am so glad to be alive. I'm so glad to be sitting here on your couch.
Yeah.
The World Health Organization has this warning. Eating processed meat increases the risk of cancer. After reviewing hundreds of studies, the International Agency for Research on Cancer has classified processed meat as carcinogenic to humans.
The idea of using nutrition to promote good health is nothing new. Indeed, Hippocrates, the ancient Greek father of Western medicine, said, "Let food be thy medicine," over 2,000 years ago. During Campbell and Esselstyn's lifetimes, the American diet has changed dramatically.
The idea that plants had protein also didn't come into play until maybe the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then it struggled through the years.
During the 1960s, heart disease was on the rise in the U.S. What doctors commonly call coronary artery disease is usually caused by a condition of the arteries that supply the heart with blood. What happens is that over time, a fatty substance in the bloodstream called cholesterol builds up in the coronary arteries, restricting the blood flow to the heart. This can ultimately cause several problems, from severe chest pain called angina to heart attacks. Cholesterol is a natural substance produced by all animals, including humans, and it's an essential component of our cells' walls. But when we consume dietary cholesterol, which is only found in animal foods like meat, eggs, and dairy products, it tends to stay in the bloodstream. This so-called plaque is what collects on the inside of our blood vessels and is the major cause of coronary artery disease. So Dr. Esselstyn started investigating the global statistics on breast cancer. One of the facts he discovered was that the incidence of breast cancer in Kenya was far lower than it was in the United States. In fact, in 1978, the chances of a woman getting breast cancer in Kenya were 82 times lower than in the U.S. Dr. Esselstyn was even more surprised by the numbers he discovered for some other types of cancer.
In the entire nation of Japan in 1958, how many autopsy-proven deaths were there from cancer of the prostate? 18. 18 in the entire nation. That, to me, was about the most mind-boggling public health figure that I think I'd ever encountered.
In the same year, the U.S. population was only about twice the size of Japan's, yet the number of prostate cancer deaths exceeded 14,000. Dr. Esselstyn also discovered that in the early 1970s, the risk for heart disease in rural China was 12 times lower than it was in the U.S. And in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, heart disease was rarely encountered. The link he noted between all the areas he studied was simple.
Virtually, the Western diet was non-existent. They had no animal products. They had no dairy, no meat.
Even more compelling to Esselstyn was some historical data that had long been overlooked. In World War II, the Germans occupied Norway. Among the first things they did was confiscate all the livestock and farm animals to provide supplies for their own troops. So the Norwegians were forced to eat mainly plant-based foods.
Now we look at the deaths in Norway, just antecedent to this period, from heart attack and stroke. 1927, 1930, 35, look at right up here, right at the very top, 1939. Bingo! In come the Germans. Immediately, 1940, wow, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. Have we ever seen a population have their cardiovascular disease plummet like this from statins, from bypass surgery?
Just like the Indian researchers, Campbell fed half the rats in his study a diet of 20% casein, the main protein in dairy products. The other half was fed only 5% casein. Over the 12 weeks of the study, the rats eating the higher protein diet had a greatly enhanced level of early liver cancer tumor growth. On the other hand, all of the rats eating only 5% protein had no evidence of cancer whatsoever. But Dr. Campbell decided to take these findings a step further. This time, instead of keeping his test rats on the same diet throughout the study, he kept them in one group and switched their diets back and forth, between 5 and 20% dairy protein, doing so at 3-week intervals. The results were astonishing. Whenever the rats were fed 20% protein, early liver tumor growth exploded. But when the same rats were given 5% protein, tumor growth actually went down.
Even more surprisingly, Dr. Campbell discovered that a 20% diet of plant proteins from soybeans and wheat did not promote cancer.
Over the next several years, Dr. Campbell initiated more extensive lab studies using various animal and plant nutrients. The results were consistent. Nutrients from animal foods promoted cancer growth, while nutrients from plant foods decreased cancer growth. 500 calories of natural plant food fills the stomach completely, triggering both our stretch and density receptors to signal our brain that we've had enough to eat. But 500 calories of unnaturally rich or processed food fills the stomach far less, deceiving these receptors into telling our brain that we need to eat more. Even worse is 500 calories of oil, which is almost pure fat and barely triggers any response at all. But why do these concentrated foods that are so harmful to us give us so much pleasure?
Dr. Lyle says the answer is related to a system called the motivational triad.
This is a trio of biological mechanisms that nature has designed into every creature on Earth so they can survive to pass their genes on to the next generation. The first leg of the motivational triad is pleasure seeking.
And primarily two things are the cause of that, and those two things are food and sex. So in the case of a great white shark, it's basically got a neon sign flashing across its forehead saying food, sex, food, sex, food, sex. Unless it's a male, then it says sex, food, but it's pretty much the same thing.
If it walked, hopped, swam, crawled, slithered, had eyes, a mama and a dad, don't eat it.
Dr. Campbell and his associates carefully chose 65 counties scattered across China. These counties were mainly located in rural or semi-rural areas. 1990. Following nearly a decade of intense effort, Dr. Campbell and his colleagues finally published their China study. It identified no less than 94,000 correlations between diet and disease.
I think the major message we got out of all these correlation analysis is only one message. The plant food-based diet, mainly cereal grains, vegetables, and fruits, and very little animal food, is always associated with lower mortality of certain cancers, stroke, and coronary heart disease.
I was active, healthy, very busy, mid-40s, absolutely no risk factors at all for any heart problem.
But Dr. Crow, even with what was considered to be a healthy cholesterol level, was actually ravaged by heart disease.
This angiogram taken after his first nearly fatal heart attack in 1996, shows how badly damaged one of his coronary arteries was. This angiogram was done after less than 3 years of entirely dietary treatment.
Talking to your doctor about ED may be the last thing you want to do, but it's definitely a conversation worth having.
I'm a practicing urologist and have been so for the last 25 years. And erectile dysfunction is actually the first clinical indicator of generalized cardiovascular disease. It's the canary in the coal mine. It's the thing that lets you know that you have some significant endothelial and vascular disease much earlier than will a heart attack.
Despite the apparent success of the dietary approach, some critics say eating this way is extreme.
Now, with the Western diet, this guarantees there are going to be, what, 500,000 people in this country this year who will have to have the front half of their body divided, their heart exposed, then veins will be taken from their leg and sewed on their heart. Some people would call that extreme.
You think someone that's a vegan is like some skinny hippie type of person. And, you know, I'm not necessarily trying to break the stereotype. I tried the diet for my own personal reasons and it worked for me. I feel like I have more energy now that I don't eat the meat products, and I also feel like I recover better in between my workouts.
What do you think the most important nutrient we get from dairy products is, like milk?
Calcium.
Calcium.
Calcium?
Calcium. 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 Or calcium.
Calcium.
But according to a study done by a distinguished Harvard researcher, nations with high levels of calcium intake tend to have high levels of hip fractures, which is a key indicator for osteoporosis.
The primary mechanisms for that is that animal protein tends to create an acid-like condition in the body called metabolic acidosis.
To combat this condition, the body draws upon its most readily available acid buffer, namely calcium in our bones. As the calcium is extracted to neutralize the excess acid, our bones are weakened.
Most of these animals here are what we call heifers. They're the young females, not yet cows.
So they haven't had their first calf yet.
Haven't had their first calf.
So they have to have their first calf before they can
Once
lactate.
they come into lactation, they almost keep them these days. They keep them pregnant continuously.
Exactly.
For 3 or 4 years.
Why are they eating grass now?
Well, this is the last time in their lifetime they're going to see grass. After that, they're in the barn. They're standing there for the rest of their life.
Well, the problem is when a kid is pulling his tray down the school lunch line, you see federal policies in action. There are burgers topped with cheese, the milk is heavily subsidized, but the vegetables and fruits, a little bit harder to find. And this is because the government contracts are going to particularly the meat producers and other producers as well. It has nothing to do with the health of the children. It has all to do with the financial health of the big agribusiness entities.
In 1998, Barnard's Group sued the USDA.
Every 5 years, the government reformulates the dietary guidelines for Americans. That's the blueprint of what Americans are supposed to eat to be healthy. And we looked at the panel that pulled it together, 11 people. 6 of the 11 had financial relationships with the food industry. So we said, hey, wait a minute. There are laws about what they're supposed to do and how transparent they are supposed to be. They violated those. And we brought them to court. And it was a long trial, but we won. But that doesn't change the fact that the policies they came up with continue to favor industry as they always have.
The food choices we make have profound global effects. It takes over 10 times the amount of energy from fossil fuels to produce a calorie of animal-based food than it does to produce a calorie of plant food. Since the 1970s, 20% of the Amazon's rainforest has been destroyed. That's an area the size of California. 80% of this cleared land is now occupied by livestock. The world's cattle alone eat enough grain to feed 8.7 billion people, nearly 2 billion more than the population on Earth. With almost 1 billion malnourished people across the globe, redirecting even a portion of the grain used to fatten cattle could feed every hungry mouth on the planet.
By eating meat, milk, and eggs the way we are, we're harming our own health, we're slaughtering 10 billion innocent animals every year in the US, and we're destroying the planet.
Statistics compiled from the United Nations and the World Health Organization demonstrate the profound global effect that diet has on health. These are the estimated amounts of animal foods produced in 9 countries, a figure that's closely related to animal food consumption. These are the numbers of deaths due to heart disease and cancer in the same countries.
You can't control your outcome of your body. Eat to live and don't live to eat.
And I'm here to discuss my topic about veganism. Vegan. When a person hears this word, they tend to think of this guy. A stereotypical hippie, you know, the save the animals man. Or these girls. Those dumb, airheaded valley girls on a strict diet and can only have water if it's 0 calories. Well, actually, vegans are just like you and me. The only difference is their eating habits. But yet some people think that they're stupid for choosing upon themselves to not eat bacon and eggs, In-N-Out burger, or ice cream. Like, who chooses to not eat ice cream? Well, actually, these vegan diets are brilliant in the way they benefit the environment. I wanted to know, how can a vegan diet benefit the environment? And by environment, I mean the climate, the water use, the land use, and the community. So first, let's go with the climate. Quote by Kirk R. Smith, an environmental professor from California, Berkeley, who was interviewed in a documentary called Cowspiracy, stated that if everybody were to stop using oil and gas entirely, we would see these effects in 100 years or so. But if everybody on Earth were to go vegan, we would see these effects within decades. He's right when he says this, because animal agriculture is completely screwing over our world and nobody is aware. When I first looked up greenhouse gas emissions, this picture, along with several others similar to this one, were the first things that came up. But it's not the leading cause. As a matter of fact, the leading cause is animal agriculture. Right now, animal agriculture is responsible for 51% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And the reason behind this is because the billions of animals in the industries today are pooping. As a matter of fact, in the United States, 7 million pounds of excrement produced by animals in the industry are produced every minute. I personally find that disgusting. But not only is it super gross, it's also terrible on how it affects the environment, because in this poop contains nitrous oxide. And although nitrous oxide is only 5% of all greenhouse gas emissions, it's 296 times more destructive than carbon dioxide. Next is water. In a book I read, The Diet for a New America, the author John Robbins stated that 5% of all water use in the US is domestic, meaning showers, laundry machines, dishwashers, etc., while 55% of the United States water use goes to animal agriculture. He's right when he says this, because not only are these animals drinking water, but they're eating plants that are given water as well. This explains also why 1/3 of Earth's entire fresh water is going to animal agriculture. Our global rainforests are basically our Earth's lungs, taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. It's a shame that an acre a second is being destroyed, and the leading cause is, you guessed it, animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is also responsible for 91% of Amazon's destruction because of the amount of land they all need to survive. Let's take 1.5 acres. That's enough for 37,000 pounds of plant-based food, or just 375 pounds of meat. Let's also have a situation in which a vegan were to only have a certain amount of land to live off of for an entire year. They would only need 1/6 of an acre to use food. Now give this same situation for a meat eater, and they would need 18 times more acres than a vegan would. So my friend did a project on world hunger, and she didn't really find any ties with animal agriculture, but I personally find it important because right now we have enough food to feed 10 billion people. And why we aren't able to feed this amount of people, first of all, because there's only 7 billion, obviously, but also because 50% of grains worldwide are being eaten by the animals in the industries. And also, 82% of children living right next to these animals that are starving, these 82% of children starving are living right next to these animals, and they're being shipped off to more well-off places like the United States, UK, and Europe. Every year, the human population eats 21 billion pounds of food, while the world's 1.5 billion cows alone are eating 135 billion pounds of food. Now, after hearing all these statistics, I challenge you to not go vegan. If you can, that's the best, but rather be like me and eat less meat and animal products less often, and go for something that'll help our world and help it change by eating plants, or, as an article in The Guardian says, meat alternatives. So don't be some disgusting pig or some lazy fat cow, because you are what you eat. Thank you.